Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Making Data Fly Information. It is presented by Chuck Donnelly, CEO and founder at RockStep Solutions, and Julie Morrison, Vice President and Principal at RockStep Solutions. My name is Judy O'Rourke, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this educational web seminar presented by LabRoots. LabRoots is the leading scientific social networking website and producer of educational virtual events and webinars. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this event is interactive. We encourage you to participate by submitting as many questions as you want during the presentation. Simply click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen and type your questions into the drop-down box. Our speakers will respond to your questions via email following the presentation. If you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, please click on the Ask a Question box to let us know that you're experiencing a problem. This presentation is educational and thus offers continuing education credits. Please click on the Continuing Education Credits tab located in the top right corner of the presentation window and follow the process to obtain your credits. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chuck Donnelly and Julie Morrison. I will now turn the presentation over to them.
Thanks, Judy. Really excited to be here today and giving this presentation about making data fly information. And we're going to talk a lot about what that really means. And when you think about it, data is the embodiment of all human knowledge. So this is really an exciting field for us. And I've been working with data from astrophysics to biomedical data for the last 30 years. I've collected data and worked with data from outer space and been more recently working with genomics data and genetics data, lab informatics data, proteomics data, all kinds of data. I'm really excited about having the opportunity today to talk about data. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie to introduce herself quickly, and then we'll get on with it.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm Julie Morrison, and my background is really in generating data, analyzing, compiling, and reporting on data. And for the last few years, I've been taking that knowledge and helping organizations and people just like you guys to take all of their different sources of data across the spectrum and bring them all together so they can start getting new insights that weren't possible when they were all separate silos. So I'm excited to start talking a little bit more about that today.
All right. Thanks, Julie. So just a quick overview outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to frame the problem. So what is the problem? We're going to talk about that and kind of put it in context. And then we're going to go through a case study. This is a really exciting case study where we've actually solved some major data problems. We're going to talk about Industry 4.0, the fourth revolution, if you will, in industry that has led to Lab 4.0 and digitalization, which is different from digitization. So this is going to be a real core and important part of the presentation today. And then we get to the core of it really with making data fly information. And we'll talk about what that means, talk about data 360, what that means, situational awareness, and the lab of the future. So put your seatbelts on. This is going to be exciting. All right. So I like to make some big, bold projections here, and these are really important because they kind of bookmark our presentation today. But in 10 years from now, digital technology capabilities will double. This is really a dramatic statement when you think about it, because this doubling of technology every 10 years means that in the next 10 years, the digital technologies that are developed will eclipse all of the digital technologies that have been developed since the beginning of digital time. And this doubling keeps happening about every 10 years or so. Another projection that we're going to make, which is also very transformative, is that in 10 years from now, robots will perform most or many of the lab tasks that are currently done by humans in your lab. So this is also like, people think this is crazy, but when you think about self-driving cars, we have robots now that are on the streets, driving cars, making incredibly complex decisions in real time, and these are life and death decisions. So the robots have become incredibly sophisticated, and we're going to see that moving into our laboratories. Lastly, I want to say that artificial intelligence algorithms will be your partner in research so that you will publish papers with artificial intelligence algorithms as co-authors on your paper. And you think about it, the time you go to get your coffee and sit down, an artificial intelligence algorithm running on a high-performance computer can read all of the journal articles in PubMed that are related to your research, digest that data using AI algorithms to help guide you to your next steps in your research. It's going to be enormously important. It's already happening today, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. So the problem is data are hard to find. It's just as simple as that. Believe it or not, people are still collecting data on binders and spreadsheets and paper and pen, and it's really not scalable. It's really not going to take us to the future. So many organizations have petabytes of data that really contain the cures for diseases, and they can't really get at the data. They can't integrate the data, can't ask new questions of old data. And so this data value, business value of data are not being achieved. And in the process, the return on investment for drug discovery is dropping precipitously from about 10% only 7 years ago to about 3% now. And this was in a report from Deloitte. So this kind of these kinds of problems now are really pushing us towards digitalization. So what does this all mean? How do we get here? You know, we have all of these different data sources, all of these different databases, and they're all connected with little different connections. And you have, you know, copying and pasting and all these little arrows between all of the databases and the data sources. And it turns out to be, after a while, becomes a web of information that is really impossible to really obtain business value from that many connections of data. And so basically what happens is we redo experiments because we can't find the data, we can't find the connections between the data elements, and we redo experiments, which is causing this ROI to drop precipitously. It's one of the causes. So what are we trying to do? We're going to talk about digitalization. And again, this is different than digitized. We're talking about a digitalization experience, and we'll define what that means more, but it's really about connecting the dots. It's really about bringing all of the data together so that you have a 360-degree view inside your data, and you have complete situational awareness of what's going on in your research laboratory. So we put together this case study, and I, of course, dramatized this to make it sound like, a breaking news article. But when you think about it, this is really kind of what's happening. I say a data tsunami nearly drowns a small research lab. RockStep Solutions, that's our company, team wrangles the data and deploys informatics systems to control data floods and rescue the research. So while this is a dramatization of it, it is actually kind of true. It is really true. And Julie's going to take this to the next spot here and talk about exactly what happened in this research lab.
Thanks, Joe. Right. So to frame us a little bit, this is an aging study. This is a partnership between Dr. Gary Churchill's laboratory at the Jackson laboratory and one of the alphabet companies. And essentially, Dr. Churchill's laboratory is doing sponsored research for this alphabet company. And they're specifically exploring diet and caloric intake on overall health and longevity of mice. So they're breaking them into cohorts, feeding them different diets, and doing a huge range of high throughput phenotyping on these animals. As you can imagine, that generates an enormous volume of data. And they were having a real trouble wrangling that and also getting maximum value from that much data. And we'll talk about why. So the data were overwhelming. When we came into the project, there were over 1,300 spreadsheets and media files and over 93,000 data points being emailed around and put into file share folders. And as you can imagine, the alphabet company wanted to just put it right into their Google algorithms and get on with their analysis. So there was a real problem getting value when there's 1,300 spreadsheets of data and your wranglers are spending time trying to piece them all together and copying and pasting. They were really losing control of it. There was a huge waste of energy and resources. And the quality control was actually difficult to manage. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So some of the things that they needed for this study was the ability to track all of the data and all of the data points around each individual animal from the time it entered their facility, whether it comes from a CRO or an animal breeding, or if it comes from in-house. They needed to track all of that, the data and clinical health records associated with that animal, because these are longevity studies. So they had a rich amount of data coming in from the animals. And also with the resources. So there were a lot of different components happening, a lot of different tests in this phenotyping pipeline. And they really needed to preserve the chain of custody with the samples and the audit, who did what. Any investigations on process or data points were needed to be easily resolved. And again, we're kind of getting to that data QC point when if something is not quite going right, how do you resolve that, and what did that look like? And we'll talk about that again in a moment. So manage workflows. So we said 1,300 spreadsheets. So can you imagine for a moment taking, this example is a blood chem that came off of an instrumentation. Imagine emailing these back and forth. And now you're trying to compile this with your body weights, with your animal health observations for the day. It's totally out of control and chaos. So now in Climb, which is our platform for managing this data, the instrumentation files and all of those spreadsheets can be automatically just dropped with a drag and drop into the system. And as you can see here, this is a simplistic example. There's not many data points. Some of these files could have hundreds of columns of data, but just as easily dragged into the system. And now all of this data is structured and searchable regardless of where it came from, regardless of it being a body weight or an instrumentation or an ELISA, et cetera. And now their clients also have data delivery pretty much on demand in real time. So aggregating and harmonizing, you're going to hear these words a lot, and I'm not going to drill into them too much because I know Chuck's going to spend some time on them later. But really the idea of bringing all these different disparate types of data together and using the same terms to describe them so that they're searchable. So for this particular use case, we took 2 years of legacy data and loaded it into Climb. The data are now searchable across time, across study types, across tasks, however the client wants to get to that data, and they're normalized and harmonized. So I talked a lot about the data QC tools. The data reviews are actually conducted in real time in the application. There are visual indicators that show whether values are out of range, and these are specified by the investigator when they set up their task in the system. Now there's a visual indicator to the technician entering the data that they might have a typo, really eliminating that form of human error. There's also sensors and other things that can run side by side with the data quality to start running ML anomaly detection algorithms on the data points. But really ultimately getting to the point where the data QC is both happening in the application and speeding it up for your checks after. And we'll talk about that in our wrap up. So Chuck's laughing because he loves this slide. First thing I said was, I love talking about the API, but I don't know why you have a naked little guy, chunky guy walking across an API data stream. So if you also wonder that, feel free to send him a message and he can email you the answer after.
I'm not sure I have one, but
but no, he does love this. But he does love this slide. But our API is really what enables this Alphabet company to get that data delivery in real time. So while the customer, the Churchill lab, is entering data directly into Climb, the client, this Alphabet company, can go in via the API, use the strings they need, pull exactly the data out that they need, and it goes right into their algorithms for analysis. So they have real-time visibility into the data and the operations, and really has simplified the whole emailing back and forth in spreadsheets. It's now a matter of a few mouse clicks. So what are the benefits? Here you have a picture of Dr. Gary Churchill, and really the primary benefit was in the organization and the accessibility of the data. Really, spreadsheets were not going back and forth anymore. felt like there was a real organization that they could access the data for their operational efficiency, but the client could also access it in real time for their analysis. And we talked a little bit about their project management and scheduling, and that's actually helping them see benefits today. But as this pipeline of tests on these animals grow over 5 or 6 years, in theory, they're going to save so much time retrieving, quality checking, analyzing the data in their studies over time. And I think of it a lot like even drug discovery. 10 years from now, when you go to file your IND, what actually happened? Was your data really organized and accessible from 10 years ago? So very similar here in a longevity study. So to wrap things up, it's very cliche, but we want everyone to be happy. And the client is now happy. They have harmonized and aggregated data. They're pulling out via the web API. There's no more spreadsheets being emailed around. The lab is happy because, well, the client's happy, but they're also getting new data insights. Their operational efficiency. This is the data point I was mentioning earlier. If there was an anomaly detected in the data, it could take over 2 weeks to track down who did what happened. Now they're saying it can happen in less than 2 hours to resolve data inefficiencies or data mistakes. And so everyone is happy on that part, and we're happy because we can support this lab across their entire journey to digital transformation. So whether they were manually entering things in paper and just getting them into spreadsheets, or whether it's spreadsheets coming off of instruments that you can drop in to the system, or we're pulling in data streams from APIs like those IoT sensors or data streams from other instruments, regardless of where this lab was or where you are in your digital journey, it will kind of depend on where you are or all of the above, and how you move from being a digitized lab to a digitalized lab. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck, and he's going to make sure that you understand the difference between digitization and digitalization.
Thank you, Julie. And just so you know, now I'm happy because you used that slide. I really appreciate that. But this is really a powerful story when you think about it, because this is research that was being conducted that is being conducted now much more efficiently. And it's because of this digital transformation that's making this all possible. And so I want to talk about how, like, kind of what are some of the models that have got us here to digital transformation and where it is going. And we'll start with the model of industry. So we're in the 4th industrial revolution, has arrived now in industry. We're there now. And if you go back in time, you see the steam engine that came into being, in the 1800s, when it was transformative. All of a sudden you could have something other than muscle and horses and, oxen doing work, but you could actually have motors doing work, working 7 days a week, 24/7, whatever, and offering a lot of energy, putting a lot of energy into manufacturing. And then, of course, Henry Ford, in the 1900s with the assembly line, another transformative event in industry where all of a sudden cars, it looked like they're being made in a week, or it looked like cars are being made every hour. Even though it took months to make a car, they would go through the assembly line. When you looked at the end of that assembly line, cars are coming off every hour. Another transformative event in industry where all of a sudden mass production was possible, and quality control. And then in the 70s and 80s, we started seeing robotic systems come into play that are controlled by computers. But still, these robotic systems, while it was transformative, because now you had these robotic arms that could do things that people were doing, they still did not have the intelligence, if you will, to do anything different than what they're programmed to do when they started their task. But now, with the digital transformation and the the Industry 4.0, we have intelligent computers that can think with artificial intelligence algorithms and that can learn while they're working, controlling these robotic arms. And that is really the massive transformation that is happening now. And that's what's bringing us things like self-driving cars and the robots that you're going to see in your research lab. So I'm going to take back or give you an example of a data-intensive industry that is now digitalized. And you can kind of use this as an example of where we're going to see the laboratory data going, the data-intensive biomedical industry going. So if we look at the airline industry or the travel industry in general, they've definitely embraced digitalization. But back in the 60s, the late 50s, early 60s, when you got your ticket, and believe me, I can remember that, when you got your ticket, you actually was written on with pencil and paper. And if you lost your ticket, you're basically out of luck. It was not a scalable system. You could not go back and find another copy of your ticket. Maybe somebody had a carbon copy in a file cabinet somewhere, but basically it was a very manual system and not scalable. And then in the, a little bit later, a decade or so later, we started seeing digital systems, databases that were tracking these reservations online, and your tickets were being printed out. And now you have a digitized system. So again, digitized, not digitalized, but we have now databases, a huge inflection point in terms of ability to operate a scalable organization or industry. And then we started seeing these electronic systems, which I separate from digitized to electronic, where you actually have these little kiosks where you can go and get your tickets. And but it's still, it's kind of, you're just accessing the database yourself. But now the travel industry, we just traveled recently to San Francisco, and got my plane tickets on the phone. They never even had a printed copy of the plane ticket. My itinerary was booked on the same application, my hotel, my car. And when I got off the airplane, actually on my return, it was really amazing because we're in Maine, it's cold, and a van was waiting for me at the back where the baggage drop was, and picked me up, brought me to my car. The car was warmed up, and they knew that I had arrived because they were watching the flight schedules, and they knew that I was nearby because I had tracking on my phone, and so they knew where I was. And this whole digitalization process was sort of playing out, making my life a lot easier at this point. And then when I got in my car, I typed in my directions where I was going, and my computer, my GPS was telling me where to go. And then there was traffic tie-ups, and it told me to take different routes to save 2 minutes. And you can see how this whole complete end-to-end digitalization has taken you through this journey of your whole travel experience, and giving you a prescriptive, using the data for prescriptive analysis to give you different options for where you're going and how to get there. So really embraced in the travel industry, and we're just starting to see that now in the research lab. So I call this the merry meeting of technologies that are all coming together in the research. In the biomedical research lab, you have machine learning, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. We'll talk a little bit more about all of these things. Digital assistants, augmented reality, and mobile services all sort of coming together at this time for the research lab. And it's going to be an inflection point or paradigm shifting in the next 10 years as the technologies mature and as our digital capabilities double in the next 10 years. So already, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, there's laboratory systems that have artificial intelligence built into them that can watch data as the data are arriving. So in this little cartoon example here, we see some data points. We see more data points arriving. We see artificial intelligence algorithms that are finding patterns in the data, and then they can transfer that data to the informatics platforms and lead to discovery sooner. So, this is obviously a cartoon example here, but these are real life systems now that we're going to actually talk a little bit more about that can do this and actually accelerate discovery and find biomarkers quicker and help find the cures faster for research. So we're going to this whole talk now, we're getting into the part where we're talking about making data fly in formation. And I was in San Francisco and I was watching the Blue Angels fly. And this was like a moment, it was a kind of pivotal moment in my, an aha moment, if you will. I was watching these jets fly and I'm thinking, why are they flying in formation? What's so important about that? How does that translate maybe to my work in data? And, you're looking at them, they're more aerodynamic, they're more energy efficient, they have mutual protection, and they have more pinpoint accuracy, and there's some technologies why that is. But anyway, there's reasons why these jets fly in formation. And if we look at data, if we think about sort of similar bringing data together in these high precision systems where you have this better precision informatics to make these data more valuable and may allow for better decision making, better business value, reusability, reproducibility, and reduce the rework that you have to do because the data are accessible and they're aligned and they're in formation, if you will. And I love the pun there, information and information. That was intentional in case you didn't get it. Now I've let that out. So what does it mean to have data in formation? What does it mean? So we talk about aggregating the data, and Julie presented the case study where we brought together these data that were in spreadsheets coming from different instruments, and they were hard to find. They're being emailed around. So now the data are aggregated. They're centralized. That's a good thing. You can centralize data, you can aggregate data, but you need to harmonize the data. And that is even a bit more, that is very difficult. In fact, in a lot of cases, it means bringing the data together with vocabularies, consistent vocabularies that annotate the data so that you can actually compare data and search data across different data sets and actually come up with meaningful results because the data are harmonized. Now, I want to just say that harmonizing data is a big challenge. It's one of the things that we try to do, that we do in our company, bringing data together, but it is an enormous challenge because different ontologies look at data in different ways. So you might have the disease ontology talking about cancer of the kidney, and then you might have a genomics ontology talking about the various mutations that are characterizing a cancer, and you might even be having the same cancer annotated with two different ontologies, and how do you bring them together? That's a challenge that's beyond the scope of this presentation today, but I want to, there are a number of organizations that spend all of their energy working on that, and it's really important. The data needs to be searchable. If they're harmonized and aggregated, then you need a search engine on the data, and that's what we did with the Churchill Lab and the case study. They can go to a platform, they can find the data, and the data need to be accessible. Accessible is, there's a lot of facets to that, if you will. There's handicap accessible if you're vision impaired or hearing impaired, but it's also accessible because you have the right authorization to get to the data, and the data need to be reusable, if you will. So the IP, the intellectual property rights need to be set up so that the data can be reusable. And all of those things coming together make the data very integratable and add business value to the data. So you can have those petabytes of data and you can actually find new cures in data without having to do new experiments. So I'm going to turn it back over to Julie, who's going to talk about Data 360 now. And we'll see where that goes.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. So I absolutely love talking about Data 360. So I'll try to keep it contained. I love talking about it because it reminds me of one of my favorite shows, Sherlock. So if you watch the BBC show Sherlock, there is an episode where they really go into detail about how Sherlock Holmes can pull all of these random factoids and data spots from his mind at any time and associate it with seemingly random things to get new observations and new insights. And this is what Data 360 is. So if you can think about here on this side, we just have a simple example of a research object in your database. So here's a mouse. It could be a compound, it could be a study or an indication, but for now, we'll just say we have this animal and we want to know everything about it. We have all of these separate data silos around it, their pedigree, their protocols, the proteome, everything about them. So if you can imagine for a minute going into your mind palace and you have this animal and being able to reach in and grab the information on the phenotype and what test was done, and you did a rotarod, and then what were the results of that, and how many times was it run, and which technician, and you get the idea, really drilling down into this and being able to look around and get any of the data associated with this animal and link it all together. This is really the idea of Data 360. So as Chuck said, it's really putting a searchable component to the data. So if we have data that's not sitting in silos, that are all coming together into a uniform searchable output, then we can actually start learning new things of the data. So for example, we may want to research an indication, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So we go into our database, we want to say, what has our organization done on this before? All right, so there's 40 studies that's been done at different locations across our organization. There's some other things. I think I want to look at this particular inhibitor, and I want to see a map view of it. So if we look at this kind of cartoon version of a mind map, we can really drill into one particular study and again, start reaching out to different parts of the data to start asking questions. Well, show me all the phenotypes, show me what was molecularly done, and even drill down piece by piece to get more and more data to associate with this particular point. So we can take that particular study and maybe we want to drill into it a different way. So we have the same study we were just visualizing with the mind map, but now we want to look at a data view. So just show me everything that we've got in the database on this particular study. Actually, so I want to drill down into mice. There's 35 mice associated with it. It shows us all of their names. We can choose the ones that are of interest. And maybe we want to know what their genotypes were, what assays have been run, what the calls were, what phenotyping has been done, what were the IoT, what were the sensors saying about their environmental conditions at that time, and did it have an impact on their microbiome, let's say. So now we have 3 mice that has data on that. You can see we're drilling into further and further levels to get exactly what we want to see and overlaying totally different data silos together to get information in one. And this is the type of thing that you can then export out to your favorite analysis engine like Power BI or Spotfire or a Google algorithm. And here are some examples of ways that data has been overlaid. So you can see the graph of the environmental sensors, the IoT sensors, plotting against body weights for that day. So if maybe you had some really weird anomalous body weights, you can go back and look at the environmental conditions and see that, oh, those 2 cages had a really high humidity that day. I wonder if that had an impact on it. So again, starting to ask the data different questions, just like in your Mind Palace, where Sherlock had take all of those random data points. Now you're starting to say, did this really weird phenotype actually affect the genotype over here, or did it affect the animal health we saw over here? Starting to take all those data points and make sense of them. So ultimately, there's kind of the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, and we're hearing that more and more, like junk data in, junk data out. AI is only as good as our data, and the data has to be aggregated, harmonized, searchable. If we can give the AI algorithms good data, then they can give us deep knowledge and learning. We ultimately want to get descriptive and prescriptive guidance in real time so we can start making better decisions, better go, no-go decisions in real time, and ultimately accessing information regardless of whether it came from. So at each stage of your discovery and development, regardless of indication, across disease or therapeutic areas, across buildings, across global organization, pulling together all of the information about the compounds, the biomarkers, the efficiency, really pulling together all of that data so that you can start getting better insights throughout the entire pipeline. And while this idea of data 360 and bringing all the data in is still aspirational, it's something that is very much happening now, and it's the holy grail would be to have every data point in your organization fed into one area where you can access it like a Mind Palace to start bridging seemingly different data areas to get better insights and new insights.
Well, that's really exciting, Julie. And it is, as Julie mentioned, this is aspirational, if you will, but actually we're a long way towards that now. The technologies are actually there now. It's a matter of changing the behaviors and putting the energy into this transformation, this digitalization. So it's exciting, it's aspirational, but you have to aspire to something in order to get to the next level. So another thing that comes out of this data 360 and becomes essentially part of it, if you will, is this concept of situational awareness. And I go back to the concept of the Blue Angels. They have this this helmet on that gives them a 360-degree view of everything that's going on around those planes. They have dashboards that give them status information on the flight platform that they're flying, and they have threat detection built right in so they get alerts, and they have predictive information that tells them something about the future, and prescriptive information that prescriptive algorithms that tell them about things that can maybe help them defend themselves. So this kind of situational awareness applies to the research lab, believe it or not, because we don't want our researchers walking around with helmets like that. I'd much rather have them looking like researchers and acting like researchers, but we can give them this 360-degree view with this situational awareness using informatics platforms that are capturing the data in real time. And this is what we're doing with the case study that we provided. They can actually get at the data, have a 360-degree view, sit down at a platform and know exactly what's going on in the research lab, who's doing what kind of work, when, and what the status is of that work. And if there's problems that arise, we are building systems now with IoT devices so that we can actually monitor the environmental health or monitor the health of freezers and have anomaly detection algorithms, which we are running now, which actually can detect problems maybe before they become serious problems, send an alert so that those problems can be resolved. And then predictive information about what's going to happen in the future. So if you see this anomaly happening in a voltage stream on a freezer, for example, you might know that that freezer is about to fail, and you have some predictive information to help guide you to a better outcome. So all of these things are happening now, and they're happening now because of the cloud. It's one of the technologies that have transformed all of this. In fact, it is really the core technology that's transformed and brought us to this time where we have digitalization. And in this view here, you can see we have the data platform with different panels of data all aggregated, and views mobile devices so that you can actually find the data while you're on the subway. If you want, you can actually look at your data, but the data, you are born mobile now with these devices, the systems, and the data are aggregated, harmonized, and searchable. So that's where we are making progress right now. We've solved this problem in a lot of areas. So now we get back to Sherlock's mind palace, if you will. Thank you, Julie, for that. I hadn't really thought about that, but this is what it is. It's really getting to a place where you can actually explore your data from the inside and actually look at it from a digital perspective. So we are working right now on something which we call the digital twin. This is not unique to us, but the digital twin is taking the physical world and in real time digitizing it so that artificial intelligence algorithms can actually be looking at the physical world through this digital data streams and actually making predictions and discoveries in real time, as I showed you prior in a slide earlier where you have these dots coming in. This is actually happening now. We're working with a company called Viam. They have these caging systems with artificial intelligence algorithms built into the caging systems. And then there's platforms like Climb that can actually provide the informatics platform so that the researchers can actually follow what's going on with the data. And you have this digital twin, which is now bringing us the lab of the future. And it really is that inflection point that I was talking about. The lab 4.0 is actually here and coming now and maturing. So Viam working with Climb as an informatics tool in the cloud and Viam on the edge is really a powerful the power of the future, if you will, powering the future. So we talk about these things out there that are streaming data in their IoT devices. They could be monitoring environment. They could be monitoring various systems that are running, whether it's freezers, it could be proteomics data, all of these data streaming to centralized platforms, and the data are aggregated. So we call it a things platform, if you will. It's that core informatics place where all of your data stream to. But I want to put up a couple of don't want to motivate with fear here, but there's some things to be concerned about or things to look out for as you're planning this. So there's a lot of vendors or manufacturers out there that have IoT-enabled devices or AI devices, and they are really, really powerful and slick, but they might be creating new data silos. And that's not the problem that you want to get into, is you have really cool systems out there building more data silos. So you really end up with limited data business value. And so it's really about bringing these data into the cloud. And the clouds are, this is really an important slide in many ways, because a lot of people don't understand that cloud hosted is not the same as pure cloud. So a lot of systems have been taken that were built for on-premises, that are in your server rooms, have now been moved to the cloud. And it really hasn't been, that's not a digital transformation. You're taking a digitalized or a digitized system, a system that digitized your lab, and you're moving it into the cloud. But it's just really moving, I don't want to say moving the problem. These are good systems in a lot of cases, but you're not really getting that access to the pure cloud technologies unless it's architected for the cloud. And then you can have that data aggregation system that has access to all of these cloud technologies, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, mobile services, and IoT devices and things like that. So that's what we call cloud enhanced. So I love the metaphor of the cloud, because the clouds are constantly changing. You look up in the sky and you see everything changing, but the clouds themselves are actually constantly changing and getting more and more and more technologically capable. And this is where that transformation from over the next 10 years, as digital technologies begin to double again, you will get that access to that through these clouds. So just be a little bit cautious about what kind of cloud systems you adopt. So why do we need to make data fly in formation? This is the crux of this question today. We talked about the digital, bookending it again with, technology doubling and robots coming into play, and this whole digital transformation that we're talking about, and artificial intelligence algorithms becoming your partners in the research lab. So we need to make the data ready for the future, and we need to make our labs ready for the future. And if we don't, it's sort of the same old thinking, same old results. So we've seen since 2010 the return on investment drop from 10% down to 3% in 2017. This is a precipitous drop, and we need to start looking at digitalization and artificial intelligence and things like that in order to help improve that ROI. So our company, RockStep Solutions, is digitalizing the animal lab and really moving into other areas of research as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to thank Julie for being here and giving a great being part of this presentation. And we're going to take any questions after, I think, through email. And thank you very much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Chuck and Julie, for your informative presentations. I would also like to thank LabRoots for making today's educational webcast possible. Before we go, I want to let everyone know that this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing through May 14th, 2019. As a final reminder, our speakers will follow up with any questions you've submitted via email. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.